Hey everyone, Phreak here. Let's talk about patch 8.13 for League of Legends. This is I guess you could say, relatively minor patch. They've certainly stopped doing mid-season changes now, so it's just more or less simple champion and item changes and whatnot. Um, this is something that they said they were going to do for the rest of the year, basically, up until the new preseason in November-ish. So we should expect most of the rest of these patches to be about this size. One thing worth noting is they seem to very heavily look at pro play this time around. I think they're being hyper vigilant about pro play because the game is so different now. They want to be as reactive as possible. Now, what's interesting is, let's talk about the timing for this patch. This next week for the European and North American LCS, we will still be on 8.12. If it works the same as last year, Rift Rivals will be on the new patch. Last year, Rift Rivals was on 7.10 or whatever the patch, I don't remember. Either way, Rift Rivals was on the new patch and NA1 anyway, despite having to fly to Europe and play it. So this time around, 8.13, assuming we do the same thing as last time, I don't know for sure, but Rift Rivals will be on 8.13. Which then means for sure, like weeks 4 of the European and North American LCS will also be on 13, and then like week 5 will be 8.14. Talking about South Korea, for those who watch the LCK a lot, they just started playing 8.12 yesterday, which means basically Korea is always going to be 2 weeks behind on competitive, which means in 2 weeks, the Koreans will play 8.13 in the LCK. Now, with Rift Rivals, that might change. I don't know for sure, but that's the general timing that I wanted to explain to you guys because of the weird timing of which Korea's weeks start. Okay. Let's go ahead and start talking about this patch in itself. As I said, I think there's a lot of focus on pro play. Aatrox's rework is coming out. I have a Champion Spotlight out. You should watch it. It's great. I think this champion's pretty cool, and hopefully people will have a lot of fun playing it. So let's go to the actual champion changes, and first up is nerfs to Aurelia. So the base damage on her passive is going down substantially. The on-hit damage is going down even further because it's no longer a total attack damage ratio. It's a bonus attack damage ratio. What that means is this is 4 stacks passive, counting her total AD, and then adding on everything else. And you can see that it's down about 11 damage in the early game, and then as time goes on and it gets even more nerfed, it's down a good 40 damage in the late game. This is a pretty substantial cut in damage. Now, I do want to point out that her base AD has not changed. The eventual attack damage ratio of 16% is the same, so as you build more and more and more attack damage, the nerf remains at only exactly 40. By the end of the game, of course, that is still a meaningful amount of difference in damage. Don't get me wrong, that definitely matters, but I wanted to bring that up to be very clear about that. However, of course, she gets more attack speed at the 4th stack, which again says the more attack damage you buy, well, this softens the blow a little bit. But until you buy the actual attack damage, this is these numbers spit in with the attack speed buff plus her actual attack speed scaling as a champion. And so the 10% extra attack speed does not quite make up for it. It gets closer, right? You can see that 214 base damage turns into 245 DPS, and the 176 becomes 212. This is a bigger gain by a decent amount, and you can see that the 18% damage cut becomes only a 13% damage cut. So again, the more attack damage she buys, I don't think you'll ever get to the point where it's actually a buff to the champion. That's not going to happen. Next change, W's damage, and W is typically an ability that Aurelia maxes second, and so they're nerfing the rank up on W's damage. If you wanted to only 1.1 of the ability, she is barely nerfed at all. She lost a 0.1 total attack damage ratio, which is not that big of a deal. But overall, W max second is really common because turns out damage reduction is a really good thing to scale. Plus this damage is going down, and so Aurelia definitely deals less damage. Next nerf coming in, and actually very happy about this. I'm actually of the opinion that champions should be released overtuned in ways that... So first of all, I think champions should be released overtuned because people are bad at the champion and just be willing to nerf them within a patch or a micro patch or something. I think that's fine. I think it's defensible. Just opinion, but that's how I feel about it. But I also think that if you're going to release something overtuned, or have something be generous, it should be generous in ways that people are going to otherwise be bad at using, such as, oh yeah, I want to use resets off of my E. Like, this is a cool thing to have be egregious on release and then be more constrained later on. So you can like sharpen some weaknesses and say, no, you've got to learn the champion to be good. Let's start trimming power off in those ways. I like that kind of thing. And so I do like that this is a nerf. 6 could have gone down to maybe 4. It doesn't really matter, but just random thoughts. Either way, these are definitely really big nerfs to Aurelia. She is overall the number 3 champion in pro play as of 8-11 and 8-12 so far in the summer split. And yeah, honestly, this is a pretty substantial nerf, and I think this is fine. One thing I wanted to point out, I took notes on, this 8% total AD became 16% bonus AD at level 1. It would take over 100 attack damage to make this a buff, so it's not a buff. You just can't get 100 AD before this scales to where it's supposed to be. All right, so moving on to the next champion, Kindred getting some pretty substantial changes as well. Now, Kindred seems to be fine, has gotten a very, very little bit of pro play. Not enough to be like, oh, it's definitely great, but it's been in there a little bit. And they seem to be fine in solo queue win rate wise. And so this first thing is actually a buff and a nerf. It returns the old W passive of healing you. When you auto attack things every once in a while. It's basically fleet footwork, but it removed the wolf reducing monster attack speed. This actually can be a nerf, especially to Kindreds who do not kite in the jungle. It is very important that you do kite in the jungle. It's actually quite a really big deal, and if you don't kite them and the red buff hits you at full speed, this will not make up for that, generally speaking. What it does do, though, is it makes Kindred slightly better at dueling champions in the actual game. When you go to gank someone, you get 30 health back. That's kind of useful. So up and down. It probably ends up being a buff, to be honest, but just saying. The other big thing is Wolf's attack speed was bugged to not scale with items. Right now, the best builds I'm seeing for Kindred tend to be like warrior first item into potentially Stormrazor or potentially like rapid fire cannon and things like that. I think Blade of the Ruin King is in there as well. Berserker's Greaves, obviously a pretty good item on them, and so there are a pretty decent number of attack speed items you like to buy in this character, and so this will have a meaningful impact. Kindred will go from fine to probably strong, and probably sees more pro play as of 8-13. That's my guess. I think Kindred is already pro viable, as we've seen by a couple of picks, and will be more so afterwards. Next up, nerfs to Lucien. Lucien definitely the strongest overperformer of the bot lane champions. It is a little bit difficult looking at fighter or mage versus marksman win rates right now because it's very skewed. So the first thing I want to point out is fighters and mages are so uncommon in solo queue that their existence doesn't really skew win rates one way or the other. They're basically all about 50%, and they're getting like 1% play rate each, and there's like 6 popular ones at 1% play rate. So most matchups in the bottom lane are still marksman versus marksman down there. Lucien is easily king of that crew. I've heard people say, oh, Lucien's good into fighters, that's what. No, that's not the reason. Fighters are far, far less common than other marksmen. Lucien is, right now, king of marksmen and is performing the best. He's also winning more than all the other champions in the bottom lane that would show up, like Lucien, MF, and there's like 1 or 2 mages that do pretty well like Ziggs, and that's like kind of it. The other side of this is it means that like marksman basically stratified, and then fighters showed up and just showed up in the middle, like because they're playing as Lucien as much as they're playing against like Jinx and stuff, and they're 50% living in the middle. So for the most part, the like metagame of matchups does not seem to be very heavily influencing win rate. I'm sure there is some difference. Of course there is. Matchups exist for a reason. But generally speaking, they've mostly lined up at 50%. The ones that are getting played anyway. So if your argument for Lucien shouldn't be nerfed, he's only good against fighters, that's not a good argument. I think that argument is wrong. Anyway, so that is to say, I do believe Lucien does deserve nerfs. Lucien is the number 9 overall champion in pro play for pick rate. He is very strong in solo queue, so I think it's fair to nerf him as a champion. Oh, here's the quick table on Aurelia's W damage. It's down up to 20%. Pretty substantial there, absolutely the case. But here's Lucien's base AD going from 114 to 108 by the end of the game. You're not going to feel this very much in a lot of cases. Lucien's common builds tend to be things like Blade of the Ruin King into Black Cleaver into Essence Reaver, which is like 150 or so bonus AD, not to count Sorcery Secondary, which is very common on him. And so him going from 168 attack damage to 162 attack damage not something you really feel very much. It exists. This will nerf from a little bit. This culling nerf is actually really big as well. It goes from doing 4x damage to 2x damage to minions. I feel like Lucien already wave clears pretty well with Q anyway. I think him getting to just like ult the wave and say screw it is fine. Is fine to get rid of. I think that's okay. But it also means something very big, which is when he does hit level 6 and tries to all-in you, you can stand behind minions and probably actually survive because it'll take roughly twice as many shots to kill off those minions. Sometimes it won't be twice as many. Sometimes instead of 2 shots, it'll be 3 because it would have overkilled by so much. So it will be up to, but not always, twice as many shots to knock down a minion wave. So it's slightly less of a nerf than you might think on paper. Either way, these are still pretty big hits to Lucien, and he'll be down quite a bit. Next up, changes to Pike. Pike seems to be doing generally fine. He exists in pro play. He has a high 40s win rate in solo queue across a lot of roles, which seems fine. So I don't feel like Pike needs nerfs per se, and it feels like they're just kind of doing changes back and forth. So pop quiz, if his health growth goes down by 10, but his armor growth and MR growth go up by 1 and 0.75, so 1, I mean, just kind of making a blind guess, do you think this is a buff or a nerf? And 2, if it's both, at which point is it better and at which point is it worse? Is it better at high levels or better at low levels and vice versa? Just for fun, ask it. The answer is it's worse early on by the tune of up to 2%. This is his max HP times the average of his armor and MR, essentially. So it's roughly how much damage he needs to take to die. And like at level 7, he takes 30 less damage to die before resists. It's not a big deal. And at the very end of the game, he is slightly more durable to the tune of 30 damage yet again. Now, what this also does, though, is it makes buying things like Frozen Heart worse, because the more armor you have, the more you wish you had health. And the more health you had, the more you wish you had armor. And because you can't buy health to get health. Now, shielding exists. If you bought, like, a locket or something, or someone else bought a locket, it would be more effective on him. If you bought lifesteal or spell vamp, it would be more effective on him. But generally speaking, this is a nerf to his let's build durability builds. And as far as the damage on his E and the damage on his R, it got shaken up. The damage got reduced at some points, but the ratio got better. Here's the table to his E. You generally max E second from what I've seen. And considering that literally buying a Relic Shield already gives you attack damage, his damage is up in the early game. And then by the time you're level 9, you've probably bought more than 25 AD by now. So basically, E just does more damage. Now, you still have to buy eventually 100 bonus attack damage, which will take you some time. That's not super free, but within 2 to 3 items, you'll be there, and it's not going to take too long. So doesn't feel like this is a nerf to Pike. Next up is the R, where once again, the damage is actually just higher in the early game, and by level 12, you certainly have more than 0 bonus attack damage. It's basically impossible. So Pike is better at level 6. Not only does it do 5% more damage, but keep in mind the ratio is also higher. So Pike got basically early game buffs. Okay, technically he's a little bit less durable in the early game, but I want to point something else out as well that I didn't do any math on, is though his actual health pool in a burst scenario is slightly lower, the value of health regen, including his base stats and things like Relic Shield, are higher. He's going to essentially regen more health because his health goes longer, right? He's 5% or something more tanky via armor and MR, so he will actually live in his laning phase for longer. So I want to point that out. These feel like overall Pike buffs. It's pretty hard to skew them as Pike nerfs. Frozen Heart Pike is nerfed, but that's kind of it. So this feels kind of fine to me. I'm okay with it. I don't think he needed to be extra durable. Seems to work okay. Next up, there is a new table called Simple Buffs. They're doing very small things. So Gragas has been exceptionally weak in solo queue. He exists in pro, but is a rarity. Overall, it's a very big nerf, of course. Drunken Rage tends to be max second. It probably still will be. Because there's still extra damage reduction, extra damage dealt with his ability, and that feels really, really, really worth it. But this is obviously going to be a very big buff to his levels 1 through 10 or so. And then, okay, technically the cooldown is longer once you hit level 13, but at that point it's already fine. Gragas would have had a great early game already. And with him having extra nice AP ratios, maybe you see Runic Echoes, he does more damage, he's going to feel good about that. The bonus reach, of course, very good as well. Like if the nerf was, yep, somehow this cooldown became 4 and then became 5, but he gains extra range, I'll probably still consider it almost a buff. So Gragas, much better, that feels great. Jarvan, 0 picks so far in pro play. And by pro play, I mean top 5 regions, aka LMS, LPL, LCK, EU, and NA. Top 5 is what that means. I think generally speaking, Vietnam is, for example, bottom heavy, and outside the top 2 teams, you wouldn't want to look at their stats, generally speaking. That's getting off topic. Either way, that's where my stats are coming from, so just FYI on that. And Jarvan has been really weak in solo queue as well. He's like mid-ish 40s. It's not great. So the passive last hits against turrets much better. That's quite nice. It's going to be very big, helpful quality of life for top lane Jarvan, which is a cool champion. I'm not good at it, but I'm glad it exists, or could exist. And then way better cooldown and way better rank 1 damage on Demacian Standard. Jarvan tends to max E last. Here's the table of changes. Cooldown, again, much, much better for a large portion of the game, and the damage much better for a large portion of the game as well. So now the E rank up has, well, a little bit less damage on it, but is still extra attack speed and such, which can be useful. You might still want to consider putting points in E, though I doubt it really. If you're ever going to max E, I think you probably stop, which is fine. The more common builds are maxing W second anyway, and voila, he can go have fun doing that. Cool, so those are nice buffs. Those will be helpful. Next up, I never knew this actually worked this way, but apparently, yeah, Jinx's rockets never actually crit properly. It only ever did just the 1.1 or the 10% of your total AD as opposed to 10% multiplied by crit. So that'll be kind of nice. Jinx gets some minor buffs there. Zap getting a 0.2 extra total attack damage ratio is a really big deal. And we can see that W damage right there. It starts at plus 11 and it ends up at plus about 23 because that's how much attack damage she has basically. And I really like this, by the way. We're going to see buffs to Jinx and Tristana and Kalista and Twitch, and all the buffs are basically to attack damage ratios. And I like this a lot. I really like the idea of, while a lot of like crit marksmen have gotten weaker, and Kalista was always kind of a low win rate solo queue champion, while their power spikes got delayed, I like the idea of, hey, look, their attack damage, like overall DPS, is still later on to the game, but here's something in the mid game to tide you over. Here is your attack damage ratios, your like one big spell damage ability. Let's have those still exist. Let's make those better so that you can use spells to get through the mid game while your auto attacks still have to like wait to scale. I like that. I think that lines up well. And I'm someone who really likes playing Jinx and Tristana and Twitch. Those are some of my very best champions. And the crit marksmen are definitely a bit weak right now, but I like that these are the kinds of changes they're doing. I think that fits really well with a good way to smooth their power curve out. And it also lets them be a little bit less reliant on the whims of items going up and down. If I had my way, I would actually do a Jinx thing where they would actually have total attack damage ratios so that they would smoothly scale throughout the game. Because I think a lot of the times these abilities fall off because your attack speed gets so high, stopping to cast a spell is a DPS nerf to you. But if it scales throughout the game on its own, and it does, extra 30 base damage or whatever because you've gained some more levels, I think that can be really, really powerful. Either way, that's not what's happening to the full degree. I think this is a good buff. Jinx is already in a decent spot, not getting any pro play, but is honestly like right at about 50% win rate in solo queue. So Jinx is playable. Jinx is completely playable and viable in solo queue, and these are pretty substantial buffs. Jinx will be above 50% win rate and will be a generally strong champion that like you should be willing to pick and happy to see on your team because she's going to win more often than she's going to lose. And that's all you can ever ask for a teammate. Next up is Kalista. Kalista has very weird damages on her E, and most of the numbers aren't listed in the tooltip in game, which is kind of awkward, but such is life. Either way, gaining extra damage on bonus spears after the first. This is this table right here. It is a total attack damage ratio, and it has a base damage on it as well as an attack damage ratio. This counts her W, by the way. This counts her having the bonus AD from her W existing, but here is how much damage the spears would do, assuming you're going to max E first, because duh, of course you are. And it's a solid like 8 to like 3 to eventually 10% bonus damage, and the attack damage ratio is 17% once it's up to max rank. For spears beyond the first. The first spear has its own damage and everything else. This is really meaningful, right? This can definitely change your break points because it's 2 extra damage per spear every spear, up to eventually like 8 extra damage per spear every spear, and 17% more of the attack damage ratio per spear every spear. This is definitely a little bit meaningful. Again, it's still only like 5% more total attack damage, but that's still a good amount of damage output. And you're using it on 3 different people because you're buying Hurricane. It's your primary damage tool. This is really meaningful. Kalista should gain at least 1% from doing this. Kalista already got a very little bit of pro play. She got 1 pick so far, and I think 1 ban. Maybe that gains a little bit. I think Kalista's always been a champion where she's been better in pro play than in solo queue, and will probably still end up in that state, but maybe it gets a little bit closer, and that would be kind of cool. Next up, buffs to Kassadin. Kassadin has exactly 1 pro pick as well. Very weak in solo queue. This W costing 1 mana is nice because it means you can stack tier while running from base and running around the map by hitting W. I like that the buffs are to the scaling of the champion. This is very touchy, of course, because the games are a little bit faster and turrets are a little bit easier to kill and barons are a little bit easier to take, thus making the games a little bit faster. And so he's still very flat in the beginning of the game and then scales up even sharper, which can be delicate. And this maybe starts to approach a point where you're almost going too sharp of a slope. But I appreciate the designers trying to embrace the Kassadin late game scaling, and if you can get there, oh boy, he's going to one-shot people even harder than before. And again, needs the buffs, absolutely. Very happy he's getting buffs. I enjoy playing Kassadin myself. He's one of the champions I really enjoyed to pick. And good to see him being better, because yeah, definitely in a weak spot. Oriana getting some follow-up from the shield duration nerf, so she's getting W cooldown down. I feel like Oriana already is like pretty oppressive, keeping the ball down and being like, you can't stand here. And the W being more often means it's more consistently a place where you just get screwed for the ball coming after you. But needed nerfs as it was. Oriana got 1 pro pick as a weak solo queue champion. Totally understandable. Makes sense to get that buff going. Next up, Riven getting 10, 5, and 0 seconds off of her ult cooldown, which is kind of nice. I guess a little bit more of a lane bully or early game roamer with that, which is kind of cool. Also getting extra 1.5 health per 5 regen, and that is this table right here. Pretty substantial regen in the early game, upwards of 20%, and then by the end game, you probably already bought a Death Dance or Ravenous Hydra, so it doesn't matter so much, but scales up to 3 health per second by the end of the game. Riven ended up falling down over the course of time. 0 pro clicks so far in Summer Split, and weak-ish solo queue, it's like 48%. Riven's an interesting champion where almost all of her play rate is from actual Riven experts. It's almost all from people who play a lot of Riven. She's one of the most skewed champions in League of Legends in that regard, where it's almost all depth as opposed to breadth. Now, she's still popular. It's a good champion, but like everyone who still plays Riven is a Riven expert, basically. She's actually insane what like her like experience graph is. That said, I still think Riven should be balanced around that being 50% because that's still the reality of where she lives. And so her being a highly like experted champion and being sub 50 feels pretty bad. Glad she's getting buffed. Next up is Tristana buffs. Tristana is one of the champions who did very, very badly. Has gotten 3 picks in pro play. So to some degree, some players find her viable. I think she's incredibly weak in solo queue. To be fair, Trist is somewhat of a generalist champion. Right, she's like a very safe, can always put out damage kind of champion. I think Tristana, I think if Tristana was an above 50% win rate champion, people would have a frustrating time playing League of Legends. Cool, Trist can do almost everything and wins more often than not. What do you do against her? Well, you don't dive her. You don't outlane her. She pushes towards her, she's ahead. You don't outweight her. She scales really well. It's like, Tristana's kind of like Caitlyn, where it's like, if she's actually really good, you just don't like playing League of Legends. And as someone who likes playing Trist, I'm okay if Trist is sub 50. Like, if Trist is like 48, 49, I think it's fine to rest there and just be like, yeah, but if you get the right situation, pick her. I still think Trist needs to have a sharper identity. Like, I think she should go sort of more on the turret killing and less on the Q700 range steroid. Like, when she got her range nerfed, I wanted that to go farther, personally, but I know there's some Trist mains who love the fact that her range scales, but that's what I would like to see, is that Trist gets to be evasive, but she doesn't get to have 700 range. Whatever. That's my pipe dream. Either way, pretty big attack damage buffs. She is, to be fair, very, very weak. So I did 2 quick little tables here. So this is the base damage of the ability did not change. You have to buy attack damage for this to matter, meaning her early landing phase with the Doran's Blade is basically unchanged, but once you get a pickaxe or a BS sword or something, it gets a little bit better. So this is Tristana E with 100 damage compared to before and after the patch, and it goes up to 11% more damage. The attack damage ratio I also included here, and it goes up to 22% more damage. And what seems to be happening right now with champions like Tristana is you tend to buy, either you rush a Stormrazor, which is like a solid 70 or so attack damage, which is quite good. And, you know, considering that you're running Absolute Focus or Celerity or something else, you've probably got about that 100 bonus AD, Sorcerer Secondary, all that kind of fun stuff. You're probably about at the 100 bonus AD, so there's your damage output. And then you go into like your Hurricane or Shiv or Rapid Fire, and then you finish Infinity Edge. Or you do double BF Sword into Hurricane or Shiv or Rapid Fire, and then you finish Infinity Edge. You do one of those two things, basically. So Marksmen are all going to buy a bunch of raw attack damage early, which is why, like, this Kalista change works, this Jinx change works, this Trist change works. And yeah, so I think Trist will still not be close to 50, but she'll probably go up from, like, I think it was like 46.5, she'll go up to like 47.5. And that starts to approach, like, what I consider fair for Trist as a win rate, but you don't have to agree with me on that, but that's how I feel. Next up, Trinity getting pretty big cooldown buffs to the E. This, as I saw from the Reddit thread on the patch notes, this probably seems to be somewhat of an overbuff. Trinity ended up doing fine by the end of it all. People ended up finding out what builds they wanted to run in the champion. Obviously, crit items got a bunch of changes going on, but with Infinity Edge getting 100 gold cheaper, Trinity was a big beneficiary of that and ended up landing in a pretty good spot. I could easily see this, so I could see this getting micro-patched in 8.13. I could see this happening where it's like, actually, Trin is abusive. He doesn't need a 7-second cooldown E. Let's revert it. I could see that. Or just getting nerfed in 8.14. Or screw it, Trin is just slightly strong in solo queue. We don't really see Trin in pro play, obviously. He's just fine in solo queue, so we'll see what happens. And then Twitch getting buffs to the E. I failed to actually do a chart for this one, but going from a 1.5 bonus to 2.1 bonus, if we compare to Tristana, which went from 1.9 to 2.4, this went from 1.5 to 2.1. That's a really pretty substantial buff, right? This is about 0.44. This went up about 0.6. Really, 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 really huge buff. Twitch seems to be doing generally okay. He's not getting seen in pro play, but he's only weak-ish in solo queue. He's like 48 or something. Now, I have heard the designers before say they expect Twitch to be a champion that lives above 50% win rate in solo queue if he's to be balanced in pro. Twitch, pretty easy to assassinate, right? Does well when you don't ward, right? Roams around. He's just a team fight only kind of champion with the ultimate. So, if you agree with that, then I guess you agree with that and you think you can live above 50. Again, Twitch is one of the champions I enjoy playing. I don't think he needs to live above 50, but I play him because he often does. Either of these are very, very big nerfs. Of course, this would require 6 auto attacks or a mix of auto attacks and the W to stack up to the maximum ratio, but that's not that hard to do. Either way, actually, it's 5 or 6. I think it's 6. I'm almost certain it's 6. I consider myself a Twitch player. I don't even know if it's 5 or 6. I'm almost certain it's 6. Either way, yeah, really substantial buff. I expect Twitch to gain a lot here. I expect them to reach really close to 50% win rate as a result of these changes. I also did not really look, but I think he's another champion that can do a Ruin King rush as opposed to doing early crit, but that's kind of up to you in the kind of game state you're in. So yeah, pretty helpful buffs to Twitch. The only things I think we're really missing here, or I kind of didn't like, is I don't think Trin needed this, but these buffs all seemed pretty necessary, honestly. All these champions needed buffs, so I'm glad to see them. And most of them seem, you know, reasonably sized. I know there's going to be a lot of crit marksmen who are clamoring for more, but I really don't think many of these champions are in a bad spot. I think Twitch and Jinx will be completely fine. Kalista will probably be fine for pro play and just remain weak for solo queue. And Trist, I think, can live sub 50 and be okay, and is going to live sub 50. All right, next up, a category called Simple Nerfs. And these are all champions with a ton of either pro play presence or really high solo queue win rate. So first up, Camille getting nerfed, and yeah, number 4 champion in pro play, a pretty solid solo queue win rate. Emax first has been the common thing. If you don't Emax, you only lose 15 damage. If you do Emax, you lose 55. We might see some of her builds change. Either way, losing 20 to 22% of the damage on the ability. If you do leave it at 1 point, again, you only lose 15, and you still have your AD ratio to cover the rest of the damage, so wouldn't be a huge deal, but her best builds and most popular builds are indeed Emax, and yes, Camille deserves it. She's mostly a jungler, sees some top lane play as well. Either way, deserving of the nerfs. Next up, Dr. Mundo. After getting all those crazy ult buffs and them getting wheeled back a little bit, he is still a very high win rate champion. Number 6 overall pick in pro. Now, Mundo was sort of intentionally a, like, big, dumb, walk at you, my face has stats on it champion. And I think that's fine because he's very overt about it. It's not like old Aatrox where he, like, pretended he had gameplay but was a ball of stats. Mundo is unapologetic about being a ball of stats. And I think, to a certain extent, that works. I do find it interesting that pro can make a pure ball of stats work. Oftentimes we hear about champions like Garen where it's like, oh, Garen can never be played in pro. He's too simple. But it's like, at least Garen has a silence. Mundo just walks at you. Okay, yes, he throws cleavers, but like still, right? And like pros are smart enough to actually buy Executioner's Calling. And Mundo's still getting a lot of play. It's actually pretty incredible that he works, but he does. Either way, he's a pretty strong win rate solo queue champion as well. Again, the number 6 overall pro play champion. I think he's like the number 2 or 3 top laner. And yeah, a little bit of damage off of his E. E is typically maxed second for what I'm seeing. And so here's the sort of stats on that. The damage bonus, by the way, can up to double. It gives 30 to 90 or 60 to 180 as he gets lower and lower and lower in health. So this can be a very, very substantial damage cut going, minus 20, could be minus 40. Either way, he still gets the like on next hit headbutt for like % of his max HP. He's still very, very powerful. This is a very small nerf. I expect like maybe 0.5% win rate. This should not be a very big change to him. Camille's going to lose probably over 1% for this, and I think deservedly so. Next up, Master Yi. Now, Master Yi actually does not have very much pro presence. He's actually only got 9 picks and 33 bans, which is a 22% presence overall in pro play. So 1/5 of all games have Master Yi in the draft. He's actually only 3 and 6 in pro play. He's actually counterable pretty easily in pro play. It was funny because I remember that's like I saw week 1 of LCK and Master Yi was banned in the vast majority of the games, but picked exactly like once in the games he wasn't banned. He was like banned in 40% and picked in 10% of the unbanned games. And I was like, yeah, people are more afraid of Yi than he is good in pro. And then as time went on, of course, his ban rate plummeted. He's got a negative win rate. So he seems to be okay in pro play. Now, that said, he is not okay in solo queue. In general, like as a champion without funneling strategies, I think Master Yi is fine. If you don't, by the way, follow pro play very much, or you haven't seen this in your games, the strategy called funneling, where your mid laner and jungler are essentially playing a duo lane, much like bot lane, where there's a support and someone taking all the bot lane farm, there's a support and someone taking all the mid and jungle farm on one champion. One of the most common ones of this is Master Yi as the farmer and Taric as a second support. And it's actually pretty nuts in solo queue. Master Yi Taric, from what I have heard, is the single highest duo in all of League of Legends. Master Yi Taric's win rate is so high, it is higher than peak Xayah Rakan ever was. And we all know peak Xayah Rakan was real dumb and made every game about them. Master Yi Taric is way better than any of that ever was. It's actually insane. And it's so strong, the game is about them as opposed to the rest of the game of League of Legends. And so, though I think funneling can be interesting and can be a cool pro strategy, and I'm actually okay with it being in my games in solo queue, it is so good, it warps the game entirely, and I think it's completely deserving of being nerfed. And so the change is actually a bit soft, and it actually buffs non-funnel regular jungle Master Yi, because non-funnel Yi got a mana cost buff. Okay, yes, his like split pushing is down because he doesn't do bonus damage to minions, but got a pretty nice mana cost buff. But here's what happened to his minion damage. It got freaking shattered. Because the base ability does 1x your total attack damage plus 20 damage at rank 1, and it's like 25 per rank up. And so instead of doing your total attack damage plus 20, it did your total attack damage plus 95. Yeah. It's a really big damage difference. So suddenly, if his Q doesn't do 200 damage to minions, he's suddenly not a good wave clear mid. He does an auto attack's worth of damage in mid. And now you can go try to fight the Yi when he wave clears and punish this. So this is I think one of the most eloquent nerfs they could have done to funnel Yi. And I think that's a good thing. Again, I think Yi jungle gets away pretty cleanly. He'll probably be okay. There's more things down the line that we'll talk about later in this patch, but this is one of the better things they could have done. Next big funnel champion, one of the next big popular combos was Nunu plus Karthus, or Nunu plus like Kaisa and things like that. But Nunu is another sort of support that you would see in funnel strategies. And I don't know exactly the win rates of like Nunu plus X, but they seem to be pretty high as well, I think. So either way, a pretty light touch, 5 to 10-ish% off the attack speed buff. However, it scales with AP, which is kind of nice. 5% requires 100 AP, 10% requires 200 AP. Pretty easy to do the math there. The ability power buff, though, has been cut in half from 40% to 20%. However, you can get it back. Once you have 400 ability power, you can put that 20% back in. Now, there's more to this story than it looks like on paper, because Nunu's W had a cap on how much AP it would give, right? Even though it says 40 or 20% flat, there was actually a maximum that could ever give. And that maximum was 40 plus 20 per rank. So 40, 60, 80, 100, 120. That was the max AP it could give you. What that meant was if your target had... so yeah, here's the attack speed portion first, right? Here's the old attack speed, here's the new attack speed, assuming you maxed it second. It's just always 80% as good, but it takes 100 to 180 ability power to keep up. Now there's 6 ranks listed in the patch notes, because if it was rank 5 and you had Visionary on, you then got rank 6 of the ability, so that's included in some places, but not here because I don't care enough. But this far right table is called AP Irrelevance, and it doesn't mean anything on its own. What it means is, again, there is a cap on how much AP Nunu can give. If your target has that much AP, the nerf didn't matter, because they would have capped anyway. Now again, of course, because the value is halved, a champion would have capped at 100, now caps at 200 here, would have capped at 300, now caps at 600 here. And if you were anywhere between those numbers, the value of the nerf is even lower. Right? You know, of course, if they're at 200, it's nothing for rank 1, because they still get their max value. They still get their whole 40 ability power. But let's say you're a max rank Blood Boil and your target has 500 AP. It's like, well, you still give them 20% of 500, which is 100, instead of the 120 the other one would give you. So it's a nerf of about 20%, not a nerf of 50%, right? So if you're following me, that's what I'm kind of talking about here. So in a lot of cases, this is not as big of a nerf as you might think. Of course, again, Nunu can get ability power himself. This does make you more likely to want to go like top lane Nunu and buy like not runic echoes, but you know what I mean? Like buy some ability power and be annoying, which top lane Nunu is very annoying, but I guess it's just the case we're at. Let's move on. Nunu, by the way, as far as solo queue is concerned, was doing fine. Was like a generally like viable 50%-ish win rate. These nerfs aren't that big. They just nerf the 0 gold Nunu. And I mean, he'll be sub 50 probably in solo queue now, but I think it's okay. It's not the worst thing in the world. Next up, nerfs to Ornn's health regen. I actually didn't do this table because I overlooked it when I first did the things. But this is a revert of the buffs that were given to him when he first came out to make his W more reliable. This length now being only 500 is actually really, really nice. You can outrange it much more easily. The width going down, pretty easy to dodge as well. So he's going to be much less reliable. And Ornn is going to be in the freaking gutter in solo queue. Now, in pro play, he was the number 3 overall top lane pick. So, you know, really popular champion. I understand wanting to nerf it, but they're going to need to find a way to buff Ornn back, because these are freaking, like, they're not that big, to be honest. Like, he doesn't need that much health regen because he can shield damage already and whatnot, and he's going to buy a catalyst at, like, level 4 and then regen that way. And, you know, if you can still land W, this is not even a difference at all, but it's going to be a difference, and he's just going to be pretty dead in solo queue. He'll probably be situational in pro play, and I think that's kind of fair, so hopefully that lines up pretty well. But yeah, I wouldn't recommend picking Ornn in solo queue. Next up is Singe. Singe was the number 4 overall top laner, so again, still a popular champion. Losing a fair bit of damage off of Fling, losing a fair bit of stats off Insanity Potion. I failed to run the numbers here, I apologize. Fling is an ability typically maxed second, so by level 13 you had it anyway. This is absolutely a nerf to his early laning phase. Absolutely a nerf here. If I recall correctly, and again, I should have done a better job of researching this, there is a base damage as well as a max health damage ratio on this, so that the nerf is not quite as big as it might look like on paper. Either way, though, still is going to matter, is going to be less damage. Singe is going to lose win rate. And to be fair, Singe is exceptionally strong. 41% presence in overall pro play, high win rate solo queue champion. As I said, number 4 overall top laner, deserving of nerfs, deserving of 5 AP, etc. off Insanity Potion. I'm kind of sad they got rid of this. I kind of liked it. You're still going to run Time Warp Tonic on Singe, because you're going to want to run Corrupting Potion. You want that move speed and everything else, but it kind of feels too bad that you don't get to do this, but it's okay. You're going to chug Corrupting half the time anyway, so this is not as big of a nerf as you might think. Either way, yeah, deserving for Singe. He'll still be above 50% in solo queue, and I think he'll still be pro viable, because I think he's always been pro viable, just no one played him for whatever reason. Next up is the other half of the Yi Taric duo. Taric, for what it's worth, is actually very powerful. He's got a good win rate in support as well as mid. He's got a 57% mid lane win rate, which is just insane. I mean, like, that's nuts, right? That is absolutely ridiculous. And that goes to show you just how stupidly good, like, Yi Taric and the other Taric combos are. So I think, yes, deserving of nerfs. And if Taric doesn't want to take farm, then he's going to have to get a bit weaker. And again, I think this champion can just take nerfs straight up, and that would be okay. So damage off of Dazzle, but it has an armor ratio a little bit higher. Here is this damage difference. The fact that it had 100 damage in the first place, I thought was just absolutely insane. It should never have happened, but that's what it was. So they cut 15 to 35 damage off the E. Presently, people were maxing E first for the 285 damage X2 ability. Now, you couldn't hit the same target twice, but you could still, like, spread the stuff out and do more damage that way. The amount of armor it takes to buff is actually not that insane. Right, if you're willing to buy armor, you can get back there. 175 is not that outlandish, considering that he has a % bonus armor on the W. I did not include the % bonus damage on the W in the math right there. Maybe I could have. It would have been, you know, a little bit more, but with W getting bug fixed, it felt a little weird because those numbers aren't listed, so I have no idea exactly how much better or worse it would have been. Either way, valuable, I think, there. Next up, Vladimir nerfs. Oh, sorry, there's more going on. Cosmic Radiance is 20 seconds longer cooldown. Here's that right here. 160 to 180, 100 becomes 120, 130 becomes 150 in the middle right there. Yeah. Again, really high win rate champion. I think Taric will land at almost exactly 50% in support. These feel like big enough nerfs that, like, he'll lose a meaningful amount and go to pretty much 50% support champion. I think Yi Taric with all these changes will still be viable. I feel like it'll still be on the strong side, but probably, I mean, it definitely will not be as game warping. I think this duo will definitely be weaker as a mid jungle duo, but yeah, I think the nerfs don't feel too heavy handed, and I think we're aimed at good things. So we'll see. Solo queue might still be a terror, but decent. I feel like this is nerfs to Vladimir E. 0.2 off the ability power ratio. I didn't run any numbers on this one either, but he was definitely one-shotting people. His new build is Spellbinder's Orb into Rabbitin's Death Cap, which are just two, like, giant AP items. So he's sitting at like 300 AP at 2 items. Really early into the game, we're talking like 20-ish minutes. And so doing like 60 less damage or so off that is a pretty big deal. So this will be a pretty big nerf. Vladimir is one of the champions that actually stacks more AP than most champions. A lot of other champions like to do, oh, I want to buy my CDR. Oh, you know, I want to buy my magic pen. I want to buy all these other things. Like, no. Vladimir just stacks ability power because ability power becomes health. Just straight up. I mean, so does CDR, to be fair. But yeah, I think this is very, very fair to just, like, or I should say, one, I think it's fair to nerf the champion, and I'll go over those numbers in a second. But also, Vladimir's the champion most affected by ability power ratio nerfs. As far as Vladimir overall, he's a number 6 champion in pro play for pick and ban rate. He's generally fine in solo queue. This nerf will drop him probably, pretty meaningfully sub 50. We'll say like 49, 48 around there. But I think Vlad can live there and be okay. And again, it was just warping a lot of stuff in solo queue. As part of what's actually keeping Vladimir's win rate down, by the way, is a decent percentage of his picks right now are in bot lane. And people are very bad at Vladimir bot lane. It's a bunch of marksman players who don't know how to play Vladimir and not playing him well. We saw that in the LCS, for example. I actually talked with Apollo before the NALCS lounge stream on this Saturday, and he said he spent 4 hours in practice tool practicing Vladimir's combos. And I asked if he was exaggerating. He's like, no, I actually spent 4 hours. And he's like, and then I still screwed it up on stage. So, just kind of wanted to bring that up, that some players have actually spent like a lot of time like making sure they like understood like what they can proto belt, what they can't, when to press Spellbinder, when not to, like what things you should press before and after your ultimate, how to get everything out there, which things you can cast together, like can you ult during E, can you W during E, can you proto belt during E, can you Spellbinder during E, should you Spellbinder during E. There's a lot of things going on that like people want to learn up, and so Vladimir, deceptively a little bit hard to play. I'm not saying he's like Yasuo tier by any means or Thresh tier, but the win rate of Vlad is being depressed. If you're a Vlad main and your win rate looks low, it's bad Vlad's depressing you quite a bit. And I think a lot of people will now hop off the Vlad train and it'll be fine. Next up is Zoe, and this is, I think, one that missed the mark. Zoe is the #1 champion in pro play right now. The #1 champion, and Zoe's not even a flex pick. She's only ever mid, which means of like the champions getting picked this much, she's the only one who's getting mono rolled. And I think these numbers are too small. So she's generally okay in solo queue. She's pretty much 50%. It's not like, she could be annoying and you that's fine. I'm not going to argue that she's not annoying. She is, let's be real. But not objectively OP in solo queue, but the most valuable champion in pro play. And these nerfs feel very small. And I'm of two minds about these nerfs. Because on the one hand, I like if W is powerful because W is the cool and interesting part of Zoe. And I would rather nerf annoying pieces of the champion. On the other hand, though, the context I had heard was W has very little gameplay to it. You hit a button and it fires for free. You don't have to land skill shots or do anything skillful. It just happens. And that's true. It does just happen. And so her late game damage is down, even if the W is only rank 1, because it is only going to be rank 1. The W does less damage because the ability power ratio is down by 0.1. Now, Zoe doesn't stack a million AP. She runs Luden's Echo, often buys like Magic Pen and stuff. But okay, still going to matter to a certain degree. And one thing that I do kind of enjoy is the movement speed duration going down. I often don't like durations scaling. I would rather, instead of like, oh, you move faster and you move faster for longer, I would just rather you just move more faster and just like find a duration that you enjoy, that you think makes sense. You know, it does allow you to have really big difference between like a level 3 Zoe where she's just doing this and a level 18 Zoe where it's like a lot more powerful and a little bit longer, but it's whatever. It's just like a little piddly thing in the back of my head. It's not that big of a deal. Either way, this nerf only matters when she's level 14 and higher, which is not that many games, and especially not that many where it's going to matter. I mean, she will hit level 14, but like at a certain point, half a second off your W just doesn't change how much you win games. So it's always going to lose like a very little bit, like probably at most 1% win rate, unless something else happens that like I'm missing here, or I'm overlooking something very substantially. And either way, she'll probably still be the number 1 pro play pick. I don't see why not. She'll probably still remain number 1, and she's going to be number 1 for Rift Rivals and Week 4, etc. One thing I want to point out, by the way, for Zoe's, Spell Thief happens more often than you might think. It's pretty good to run Hex Flash on Zoe, because if you complete Hex Flash and you actually blink forwards, you trigger Spell Thief, because you've now cast a summoner spell. And I think a lot of Zoes should be running Hex Flash because it's a really powerful thing. Jump over the wall, have some move speed, go do some things, let's go. I think it's still not an ability you would ever max second, especially now with this nerf. I think you could have maybe considered it over Sleepy Treble Level in very specific scenarios, but definitely not anymore. Also want to point out that Unsealed Spellbook is getting buffed this patch, and you might want to consider that because, again, Unsealed Spellbook works with Spell Thief. Zoe could really find some value out of this. Now, maybe I'm really wrong and people are actually maxing W second, and if I missed that, then I missed that, but I don't think I did. If so, this is a bigger nerf than I thought, but I don't think that's true. Maybe it really is. I just don't think so, but either way, we're going to move on. Ginsu's Rageblade getting nerfed. This is going to nerf Varus. Poor boy. It's going to nerf Kaisa. It's going to nerf Master Yi. There's plenty of other champions that did like Rageblade every once in a while. It was like something that Vayne's considered every once in a while. There's other champions I'm sure that I'm just not thinking. Kayle is a good one, but Kayle wins a lot, so it's not that big of a deal. Yeah, basically this means that Rageblade will go from giving up to 24% bonus AD and AP to only giving 15% bonus AD and AP. That's the nerf right there at max stack. It matters, it nerfs them. I think they intend on doing some kind of rework to Ginsu's once again because it ended up still being a rush item and being a good capstone item. I think they wanted it to only be a capstone item, which is why they had it do percent bonuses. Just ended up being so good you bought it first anyway, probably because the on-hit damage it gave was so high. Whoops, I guess. Whatever. Yeah, I think it's weird, right? Because, like, again, I think they want to rework the item so that it actually fits a niche, not all niches. And then the champions will have to be balanced around new Rageblade, because I'm not going to probably play Rageblade Jinx ever, or Rageblade Ashe ever, or Rageblade Nunu ever, unless it's just stupidly overpowered. But if I'm an on-hit champion, like old Aatrox, like Jax, there's another one, you know, like maybe a certain kind of Aurelia, like Varus, like Kaisa, when I want to play that kind of a build, then I would buy it. And again, I have to be balanced around this item, and this item needs to actually sit in a good niche. So it is going to require work. I think it's fine to nerf the item. I think Varus is going to sit in a bad spot, and that's too bad. Although I think AP Varus was generally fine. I think a lot of Varus's win rate is low because people aren't playing the right builds on him. Kaisa, yeah, definitely really strong as AP Kaisa. Was a really, really big champion in pro play. Seems to be fine-ish in solo queue. Okay. I'm okay with it personally. Next up, Domination getting very small buffs to the AP and AD. It's now tied to sorcery. Cool. It's not going to make any really big differences. Getting your extra like 1 or 2 ability power is not actually going to change how much you're going to win games, but it's going to feel good that you don't just like randomly get less stats than other champions. That's kind of nice. Buff to Hail of Blades because it's still undertuned. I was right. It was still too weak last time. This is probably approaching viability here. You get more time to auto attack before it drops off, and it recharges more quickly. This is probably starts getting into territory where I'm going to start considering on champions. And I'm not sure right away who I want it to be on, who's going to really benefit the most out of this, but this seems really good. And yeah, I think we're going to start seeing some Halo Blades users in this patch. And I'm excited to look through solo queue win rates at a certain point and figure out what the new Halo Blades champion is and probably play it in normals or ranked if it's something I know how to play. Next up, as I mentioned before, there are buffs to Unsealed Spellbook. The max cap on this reduction is still 120 seconds. It just comes in way faster and is faster every step along the way. So you will just overall get more extra summoners out of Unsealed Spellbook. That's quite nice. Also, wait, hold on. Am I doing something stupidly? Oh no, okay. You don't have to cycle through as many spells. That's what it is. You don't have to cycle through as many spells as well. So you can also get back to the ones you care about more quickly. That's the other part of this buff. So you get to max stack faster, and you can get back to the one you care about faster, or ones you care about more than the other options. There we go. Quicker. So really big buffs to Unsealed Spellbook because I think it definitely was on the weak side. And again, another keystone that I'm excited to play with because I think this is now, assuming the numbers are good, and I think they're close. I think this is a better world for Unsealed Spellbook to live than it did. It's a better place for it to live than old Spellbook, where you just like, well, I run Ignite and then I get back to lane with Teleport, and then I just keep Teleport the rest of the game. So I've got Teleport, and my flash is lower cooldown because I ran Spellbook. It was like really boring. So I think this is cool. And assuming it is powerful enough, and I think it might be, I'm excited to start playing around with it. This feels like a good change to let me do fun things. Next up, they did things to early game Snowball. Another one where I actually forgot to do the numbers for, but basically your respawn timer is 4 to 16 seconds shorter in the early levels, and then at level 7 it's 4 seconds, and then at the end of the game it's the same. So the ending games is not different, but basically if you get picked off in the early lane or you die to a jungle camp like I do once in a while, you're back in the map a little bit sooner. Now what's interesting is this buffs teleport and non-teleport alike, but I feel like it's a bigger buff to teleport users because if it takes you 20 seconds to walk back to lane, the difference between 24 and 28 seconds is not that big, generally speaking. You're going to get back really slowly after a full minion wave, and there's going to be times where that 4 seconds would have saved you something. If the difference between getting back to lane is 10 and 14 seconds, you are much more likely to catch whatever you're going to miss. You're missing a much smaller percentage of your lane. And in general, I think it's actually a pretty big deal for that. Now, it's also possible that the timers are fast enough that if you get killed, you can choose to not TP back to lane because you'll be able to get back to your lane in time to not lose out on too much XP. In general, the goal is just to say, hey, if you die, you shouldn't auto-lose lane quite as hard. And I actually do like this idea. I like the idea of finding ways to soften how much losing lane sucks. I think that's actually a really, really big deal, especially in the side lanes where the distance back is so long. Like, I actually wish there was sort of a minor home guard boost for the first 10 minutes of the game when you walk past like the tier 2 turret on the side lane, so that if you don't have TP, you leave your nexus, you leave down the side of the lane, and then you can get back to your lane in the same amount of time it takes a mid laner to get back to lane. That's what I would like to see happen so that you don't run TP, because right now we're in a world where in pro play you're seeing 3 teleports. You're seeing top, mid, and bot run it almost every single game. And that's just kind of boring. I think combat summoners are more exciting. They're more interesting. They let you do more cool things, as opposed to, well, you see, I pushed the lane and then recalled for a tier and teleported, so now I'm winning lane. And you're like, wow, gameplay. So, again, glad to see that sort of, it feels like reliance on TP goes down, but at the same time, I think also TP got better as a result. So, I don't know. We'll see. Either way, I think this is still a good change. All right, next up, Bounties getting a gold difference. I did run numbers on this. They added a 2-kill gold bounty, and they buffed the gold bounties from 3 kills up and onwards. Now, bounties have had a lot of changes throughout history. The end of 2015 was when global gold bounties became a thing. Before 2015, champions were with X amount of gold. I think it was like up to 500 or so. And when you killed it, you got 500, and the assist pool was half of that gold. So it was 250 or whatever the number actually was based on their kill streak. And then that was the money that was given out to the assist pool. And then in the end of 2015, it was like, no, kills are only ever worth 300 gold at most, plus the 150 if they're their assist pool. With an added bounty bonus if they are on a big kill streak. There's some global gold given across to the rest of the team. Now, what's funny is that came in at about the same time that assist streaks went away. Where if you were a support and you had more assists than kills, or you're a jungler, or you're anyone, you had more assists than kills, if you got into more and more fights, your assists would be just worth more money flatly. And so just any kill was worth more. And that ended up being a snowballing mechanic because you would just kill them and then everyone would be richer and your kills would be worth a ton because they have a bunch of assists. So these supports getting rich. And yeah, so eventually they got rid of that. And they said, okay, it's a global gold bounty. And they're like, hey, global gold bounties kind of suck because you don't get your gold back for losing lane. And also just like randomly the Master Yi mid lane just got extra gold for something he didn't do. And so a couple patches ago, they said, okay, screw it. We're back to you only ever get 150 gold for the assist pool, but now the individual kill is worth more gold. What ended up happening, though, as we look at this, is when we compare 8.9 to 8.12, which is when the gold went back to being individual, it was a lot less money for most of the game. You can see it was 100 less for a 1-kill streak, 50 less for a 2-kill streak. Wait, I did something wrong here because there's no way that should have been like that. I did some numbers wrong. It's probably 450 and I'm dumb. Either way, let's move on. Anyway, in a lot of cases, it was less gold in a lot of cases in 8.12. For the overall gold. Then 8.13 was like, all right, there's not enough gold in the system anymore. Let's buff stuff back up. Let's get money into the pockets of players yet again, and by buffing it in the realm to individual players. Again, I think this should have been 450, and I'm silly for doing a typo here. Not any better really in initial shutdowns, but gold flooding back into the pockets. You can see here, comparing 8.8 to 8.13, bounties are overall higher than they have been in quite some time. Which is a cool thing. Big bounties, lots of extra shutdown gold, and it scales up forever too. So when you get rid of that 13 kill Master Yi, it's 1150 gold to you plus 150 spread across your team. That is a lot of money, and that's cool. I like that a lot. All right, next up, small global gold nerf to outer turrets. 50 gold per player down, so 250 gold overall off the map. Turret killing is going to snowball the teams less hard. I'm fine with that. More and more over time, turrets have been less of a team objective. At least the outer turrets, that's been kind of the goal, is that outer turrets and kind of inner turrets are more of an individual gold objective. And then the inhibitor stuff, Nexus stuff, and things like Baron and Dragon obviously are more global based, and that feels pretty reasonable. So yeah, they're putting a lot more gold into, hey, if the Riven's killing you, but you get one back, you get a lot of gold back. And then also if you get to kill the turret, well, there's still pretty good gold for you, but it's not going to snowball your team quite as much. So they're trying to basically, and I'm going to kind of summarize this overall because it's been happening for several patches now. The goals have been to say, look, if the game was going to end, let's just end the game. Let the team grab Baron, let them kill the base, stop turtling, kill the Nexus. Let's just let the games actually end. And I think that's a good thing. If they were going to win, just let them win. And so those were some of the changes, like making Nexus turrets less healthy. Because at a certain point, if you're hitting Nexus turrets, you probably deserved the win. Generally speaking, right? And if you're hitting inhibitor turrets, you probably deserve to kill the thing. I think those are pretty defensible changes. You can argue that Herald and Baron were maybe a bit too aggressive, but I think it's generally okay-ish. I mean, we'll see. That can still be looked at, but that's kind of the goal. What they're also trying to do is say, hey, let's not have as many games be in a well, we're screwed state, right? Basically, if you're in a state of, well, we're screwed, but the game's not over, you're just having no fun, right? Well, we're screwed, let's wait for them to end. Okay, let's let them end. And then, well, we're screwed, but we're at minute 3, let's just not have you be screwed, right? Let's have you respawn sooner. Let's have you have the ability to kill the Riven and get gold back and catch up. Right? If he's on a 3-kill spree, you get a second kill worth of gold. right? If the Riven starts out 3-0 on you and you get 1 kill back, you're kind of at 2 kills. And you've bridged that gap a little bit. And in fact, if they got 2 kills, you got 1.5, right? You've really come close to bridging that gap. And I kind of like that. That actually feels pretty good, that you can basically earn back half their kill gold. Personally, okay with it. Personally, I understand not everyone necessarily feels that way, but I think that's reasonable. I think it's kind of reasonable to say, yeah, you know what? For every kill past the first, I get more gold, and I can bridge that gap. And it's something that players are gonna have to learn to play around, because this is the biggest that individual bounties have ever been in League of Legends, I think, by far and for sure. So when you're the 4-0 Fiora and you get ganked once and the Riven kills you, you need to realize that is not a 1-0 Riven, that is a 2-0 Riven, or a 2-4 Riven, you know what I mean? This is a really big deal. This I think should not be understated. This is a very, very large deal. And there's going to be a lot of, like, I'm going to say Shaco mains because I just love making fun of Shaco players, but there's going to be a bunch of Riven mains and Yasuo mains who are like, wow, guys, I started out 8-0, I can't carry this team. It's like, well, you started out 8-0, but then you gave Vayne 700 gold. That's a big deal. Be smart about it. So when you're ahead, you got to be smart about it. And it means that if you get that kill, ooh, that's going to feel really good for you, where you're like, guys, I just killed that 3-0 Vayne. I got Infinity. Let's go. So that's kind of cool. I like that. I think that's actually really good. But overall, that snowballing Yi or whatever won't end the game quite as quickly, because less global gold for taking the turrets down, right? If your team is snowballing overall and you've killed all 3 outers, that's 750 less total gold in the game. That's a lot, right? So if you're winning the early macro to get the outers, there's 750 less gold to snowball with. So the games are much less likely to get into the, well, we're winning by too much, the game's over. There's still a lot of gold being gained, right? Again, there's still a lot of gold per turret going over, but the idea you can fight back is getting stronger, and I do like that. And I hope that's not in a state where people feel like they are being punished for winning, because I don't think they are. They're never giving back full gold. They are giving back a lot, but never giving back full gold. So I'm hoping this ends up being pretty cool. Next up, a change that I'm very happy about, very happy about, and people actually went back and forth on this a little bit about details, but the version that I thought was best is the one that went into the game, so hooray for me and for the designers. Everything except red and blue buff is now killed by Bomby's Cinder, Cinderhulk, and Hunter's Talisman. There were versions where it was like, hey, you know, if you're actively auto-attacking the blue for the red buff, it'll take it, but if you don't actively auto-attack, it won't take it. But then that could be weird with things like Scuttle, where it's like, did I attack it in time? Is it burning down? Oh, I didn't get it. Also, what if I'm like actively leashing blue and then it's getting lower and lower, and then actually it decided that I attacked it too recently? Like, there were a bunch of other versions that I thought weren't as clean and weren't as obvious. And I'm glad they went with the clean and obvious one, which is, sorry, you still have to last hit the red and blue buff. You have to auto-attack it, or land a direct damage spell on it to kill it, or have your red buff tick over on it. But everything else, you can now walk away from wolves and the wolf will die, which is, I think, a really good thing. So yay, junglers can feel better. It will save them 1 auto-attack on some of their camps. Instant feedback on inappropriate name change is better. That's cool. Bug fixes, almost all very small. None of these really mean all that much. Presence of Mind now works in Yasuo and Rek'Sai. Great. I didn't know that was a bug with Caitlyn, but there you go. That's a thing. Yeah, overall pretty small stuff. Really exciting Garen and Darius skins. Those look really sweet. Hopefully people are going to like those. And Aatrox chromas for the Aatrox rework, which is going to be probably pretty cool as well. So that seems nice. That's the patch. Let's do a TLDR. I rambled a lot at the end there because I did. Okay. TLDR patch 8.13. Aatrox rework is coming out. Looks really cool. Watch the spotlight. Aurelia was one of the very biggest champions in pro play, losing a lot of damage off the passive, losing a bit of damage off the W, losing a bit of duration off the E and R. Will remain pro viable, will be, like, win rate wise, slightly weak in solo queue, but I think still totally playable if you're a good Aurelia player. Next up, Kindred, losing the attack speed shred off of monsters from W, but instead gaining the heal passive, the old heal passive from W. And now Wolf's attack speed scales properly with items. Overall, this is probably a slightly power up to Kindred. Kindred seems roughly viable, but shouldn't change all that much. shouldn't be a big deal. Lucien, one of the kings of the bottom lane for sure, losing a decent amount of attack damage growth, losing a lot of damage output to lane minions, definitely going to lower his assassination power, will probably remain above 50% and still very, very viable. Next up, Pike is overall going to remain as durable as before, but is going to be less good buying armor and MR, maybe pushing him towards building pure damage. These end up being damage buffs. Trust me on this. In pretty much all cases, he's going to be doing more damage as long as you're actually buying attack damage at all. That's how the math works out. Simple buffs. Gragas W, just better. He's very, very weak right now. Could use it. Will probably remain sub 50, but gonna be fine. Jarvan has basically no incentive for ranking E anymore. A lot of that got cut off. Definitely a weak champion. Gonna gain some power in top lane. He can last it under turrets, and he's gonna have more flags, which is good as well. Jarvan's gonna gain a lot, get pretty close to 50% win rate as a jungler. Jinx, actually pretty close to powerful. It was very close to 50% win rate. This is a very substantial buff to her W damage. This is a looks nice on paper, is going to matter some damage amp to her rocket form. Overall, Jinx will sit at above 50% and be totally viable in solo queue. Kalista getting some pretty meaningful damage buffs to her E, is going to sit sub 50 in solo queue. We'll probably see some more pro play now as a result, and that's going to be pretty fine. Cassidy can stack tier faster and overall has better late game scaling with higher ability power ratios. Exceptionally weak champion in solo queue. Will definitely, I think, sit sub 50, but probably be viable for good Cassidy players, especially if it's a decent matchup. You don't get punished in your lane. You can actually build some ability power. Next up, Oriana, definitely a very weak solo queue champion. No pro play really either. This is a pretty substantial cooldown buff to her W, and will sit sub 50, but get a lot better. Riven, pretty meaningful health regen buff and a kind of very subtle R cooldown buff to the early ranks. Overall, will approach 50% win rate, and that'll be just fine. Riven a little bit weak, will end up being in a pretty good spot. Tristana definitely in a weak state after the crit changes. I think Tristana personally should be allowed to sit sub 50 because she is so generalist as a champion. This buff overall is reasonably meaningful to her damage output in the mid game. You're going to buy BF swords early anyway. Tristana will gain at least 1% win rate, I feel like. Sit sub 50, but that's going to be fine. I think Tristana is going to be in a decent spot. Might even see pro play. Trinity was already pretty decent. He's probably going to be a bit overpowered as a result of these changes to his spinning slash cooldown. I'm pretty afraid of Trinity in solo queue. Might even see nerfs at 814. Might even see a micro patch, but I doubt it. Twitch is slightly weak in solo queue and is not getting any pro play. This is a very substantial buff to his E attack damage ratio, though, and will shoot really far up in win rate. I expect to see that out of Twitch. He's going to gain quite a bit here. Next up, Camille was a very, very big pick in pro play, number 4 overall. I think really does need the nerfs. Emax was a very common build, and now going to be less likely so because the rank of incentive went down quite a bit. Dr. Mundo was the number 3, I believe, overall top laner, number 2 or 3 overall top laner, number 6 overall champion in pro. I think these nerfs are very, very small. Not going to mean very much to him. He will still be just fine in... he's actually pretty in... yeah, he's going to be just fine in solo queue. He'll still be above 50%, and we'll still see him in pro play as well, so it's not going to change very much. Master Yi... most of the nerfs are to his sort of laning phase when he's playing like funneled Master Yi or Super Yi, as some would call them, like the Yi Taric duo. Definitely meaningful. This is a very, 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 very substantial damage cut to his early damage to minions. Is almost half off. It's almost half off the ability in the early game. That's definitely meaningful. He's going to clear waves way, way, way worse, but hey, he's got better mana and he's going to end up being, I think, fine. If you're playing with a normal jungler, you're not going to notice too much about the champion, but yeah, Super Yi is going to lose a lot right here. Next up, Nunu does lose a decent amount of attack speed, a decent amount of ability power being gifted. This nerf is not as big as you think because the amount of AP you could give was already capped, so you're probably not actually things that only be half as good. Either way, Nunu will probably be sub 50 in solo queue, and the Nunu Karthus combo is going to be a little bit weaker. Next up, Ornn getting some pretty substantial nerfs. He was already really bad in solo queue. He's going to fall right the hell off. He was the overall number 3 top laner in pro play and will fall off from that right now. Singe was the number 4 top laner and an exceptionally high win rate solo queue champion, losing some pretty meaningful damage off of his E, losing a pretty trivial amount of stats off of his R. This more exists on paper than an actual gameplay impact, but it exists, so it's still a nerf. Time Warp Tonic giving him move speed during Insanity Potion was a nice to have. Even still, you're going to be running Crafting Potion a lot of the time, so you're going to get that buff a lot of the time anyway. Either way, Singe will lose a fair bit of win rate, will still probably be above 50%, and we'll probably still see some pro play. Taric was very, very strong, both as a Super Yi champion, as like his mid lane support, as well as a regular bot lane support. I think Taric is okay to be nerfed, and he will be so. Overall, losing a lot of damage off the Dazzle. Now, if you are buying armor items, you will catch up for this. This is not that hard to catch up. Once you get to about 2 or 3 items on Taric, you're going to eclipse your old damage, and you're going to be just fine. This 20 seconds off the R is just going to be a straight nerf, of course, and Taric will still end up being a reasonably strong champion, but it's mostly aimed at having nerfs to Super Yi. Next up, Vladimir E losing quite a bit of the ability power ratio off of it. Vlad is a champion who stacks a lot of AP, so he's going to feel this nerf more than a lot of other champions for a similar sized AP ratio nerf. Either way, I think Vlad will still be a viable champion, and it's going to be fine. It was overall a very popular champion in pro play. Next up, we have Zoe. Zoe was the #1 champion in pro, and I think these nerfs are much too small to mean a lot to her. So Zoe will still be a very popular champion in pro play. And yeah, I mean, she's just going to be a really, really big deal overall in pro. She's generally fine in solo queue. These nerfs don't seem all that big, so I think she'll be fine in solo queue still, and still big in pro. Ginsu's Rage Blade, the max attack damage ability power it can grant you goes from 24 to 15%. Bonus AD and AP, that's definitely fairly meaningful. Overall, there's going to be nerfs to Kaisa, Varus, and a lot of those on-hit melee champions like Jax and Master Yi. Again, it's another scaling nerf to Master Yi to try to push down some of how abusive he could have gotten with the Yi Taric stuff. Super Kaisa, in a very similar sort of scenario here, was gaining a lot off of Ginsu's Rage Blade because she was buying so much more attack damage and ability power than other champions. In general, they're going to eventually rework Rage Blade yet again to find a better version of this that's not just the best first item and the best last item. They'll get there eventually. Minor buffs to ability power and attack damage for Domination being your primary. Buffs to Halo Blades probably viable now. Buffs to Unsealed Spellbook probably viable now. A really nice sort of shortening to your early game death timers should get you back in a lane if you're having a bad early game. And then it's the same from the late onwards. Should help you getting snowballed on so you can kind of catch your XP before you get too far behind. Also, a lot more bounty for killing champions who are ahead. You're getting roughly half their gold back. You're getting roughly half the gold back that they got from killing you as your bounty. Should help you get back into the game quite a bit more. And also, 250 total gold removed from outer turrets right now is a pretty substantial cut as well. Should reduce snowballing. The goal is to put less games in an unwinnable state from early snowball. And I think this will do that. This is actually a lot of gold taken away from winners and a lot of gold given back to losers if they can find themselves a comeback mechanic. That feels pretty good. Also, now if you have a Balmy Cinder or a Hunter's Talisman, you can now last hit large monsters aside from red and blue, which is great. That's the TLDR for the patch. Thank you all very much for watching. As always, please give me feedback and let me know what you liked, what you didn't like, what you think I missed, and I'll try to keep up with that. And I'll see you next time.